Back, everybody. This episode is going to be dedicated to Adam Thielen because as we're talking about pop culture, NFL is pop culture, and since he graduated MSU and I got to watch him my senior year, possibly one of the best homegrown NFL football players for the Minnesota Vikings, which doesn't take much because, again, the Vikings are quite lousy always. But here we are talking about local folk pop culture, and we're going to talk about is how they diffuse and how they change over time. So the first thing is, how do local and folk cultures sustain themselves? Well, to sustain themselves, the only way to avoid becoming assimilated or acculturized into pop culture, they have to find a way to seclude or exclude themselves from society. So to preserve them, they oftentimes find a place to live away from pop culture. If you can't do that, what's called assimilation takes place. And this is what's happened with Native Americans. You look at the picture on the bottom right, you can see it's the same human being, but when assimilation takes place, the colonists forced Native Americans to basically be stripped of their indigenous culture traits and act like a American and dress like an American. This same thing kind of happens to Aborigines in Australia and Inuits in Canada. So if you do find a traditional Aborigine or Inuit in Canada or Australia, you find them in a very secluded rural area outside the urban areas. So what do local cultures do? They try to exclude themselves or isolate themselves. Japan, for example, is a country that tries to completely isolate themselves and not allow immigrants. They also don't usually have national news sources that are allowed to enter their country. So it's a way that they can seclude their own unique local cultural heritage. The issue with a folk culture is there's also an attempt to always culturally appropriate their traits. So, for example, when Americans, or not Americans, but when the world used dream catchers as a way to keep bad dreams out of your crib or bassinet, that really came from the idea of Native Americans using a dream catcher in the center of their teepee to keep evil spirits out of their tents or their teepees. Same thing happened with Uggs and Crocs, taking it from the original source, commodifying it, meaning making it fit your own, as cultural appropriation would tell you, and then commodifying it to sell it to make a profit. So local and folk cultures try to prevent cultural appropriation from taking place because when they do that, a piece of their culture is lost. So again, what they do is they move to an urban or rural area. You'll see groups like the Hutterites or the Amish. They're predominantly found in rural areas of the world. They usually always lived communally, and they have a similar economic activity. It's oftentimes focused around farming. They do accept some technology if you're the Hutterite colony, especially internet dating, to really avoid inbreeding. We have one in Mountain Lake, Minnesota. It's a Hutterite colony that's actually south of Mountain Lake. They live as a communal area. My brother has sold farm equipment to them. They actually are very advanced in the form of automated hog farming, and they sell their inventions across the world. And what you find, though, in these societies is they're oftentimes patriarchal in nature, meaning most of the time the men are the ones that are in charge. And I just want to show you kind of what it's like to be in a culture that's a Hutterite. But before I do that, I just want to show you a Hutterite kind of norms. Their gender roles: the men usually run the colony. They usually are also the church officials. You have families that are usually 5 to 6, and they need a high birth rate or a high TFR because otherwise their society would die. Okay, so typically women do that traditional work that we've seen for centuries. Children often stay in the schools. They don't leave the society because if they do leave the society, they oftentimes can't come back because they've been influenced by pop culture and they don't want it to kind of assimilate into their culture. Technology that does occur is really only the online dating apps and cell phones that's used for communication or for dating purposes. They might use some modern vehicles, but otherwise it's very traditional vehicles. And a lot of the taboos are just simply that pop culture is not accepted. There's not video games, or if it is a cell phone, it's only run by the colony for work purposes, and they don't have TV and internet like we're used to seeing. So let me just show you what it's like to be in a Hutterite colony. hopefully the video have it. You can kind of see what it's like to be in a Hutterite colony. I'm going to assume that you guys know what taboos are. Think of taboos as like not eating pork or living a Jewish kosher lifestyle. Taboos that deal with like middle fingers or standing up or taking shoes off in different societies can be tabooed based off of your actions. What might seem normal in one society is completely taboo or rude in another. That is kind of the different taboos that you'd learn about and read about in the textbook. And you can read that link as well. But now what happens if you are not in a rural area? Well, we see this in actually America. We have ethnic neighborhoods that exist as a way to still preserve their local cultures. So you might see an ethnic neighborhood in Mankato here as some of our traditional Somali or Sudanese or Kenyan families that maybe instead of a neighborhood, they have like apartment floors where it's a certain tribe or a certain group of people that live on the same floor or in a certain apartment building that they kind of create their own little ethnic neighborhood. So it's a way to create a space to practice similar customs. We might see businesses do this or house of worships do this, but it's a way that people group together. If you've ever seen the movie Gran Torino, there's a Hmong family and many other Hmong families that move into a neighborhood and live peacefully together as a way to kind of preserve Hmong Buddhist culture. And you can see that in many different examples throughout. Here's a vocab word that your textbook, as you have caught on, maybe hasn't covered a lot of this because your textbook is a little more vague on a lot of this information. And so I'm being more specific. A word called neolocalism. And the only way you'd see this is in a multiple choice question. But neolocalism is when you purposely seek out a culture and try to recreate it in response to like either losing it or trying to make money off it. So neo-localize, neo meaning new, you create a new local culture. And this is like seen at Branson, Missouri. It's like focused on like shows and pop culture. If you think of South Dakota, if you've ever been to Wall Drug, it's trying to bring back the Wild Wild West. New Prague, right here in New Prague, Minnesota, they're trying to create Czech heritage or recreate the Czech heritage. So a lot of times neolocalism is used to preserve and make money off a culture that's maybe the majority culture in the area that still practices pop culture, but as a way to still preserve the heritage. All right. Clearly, it's not authentic. It's fake, but it is an attempt to make some money and create a tourist trap. Now, I've referenced the word commodification maybe earlier, and you're going to see it on an activity later this year. But commodification is when you take something from another, usually folk or local culture, and make it fit your own with the purpose of selling it. So it's a material culture. It's used for sale. This is what happened with dream catchers. This is when you buy autographs or relics. This is, you can think of anytime somebody makes a signature and then you sell it, that's commodification. When you try to recreate a unique bar situation like it's done with Irish pubs or like, I'm trying to think, Buffalo Wild Wings or Olive Garden, you're trying to create something that's already been made to make it fit your own. That's really called commodification. And when you commodify something, you lose its authenticity, but it's a way for you to get people to visit your place. All right. Now, I'm going to keep going on because I want to talk about a few more things before we stop. All right. So now we talked about local and folk culture before. Now we're going to talk about how pop culture is being diffused. The best way to describe how pop culture is diffused is simply time-space compression. It is diffusing faster and more rapid than we would ever imagine because the internet is reaching places like we never thought it would. It's finding the most rural areas of Africa now, Australia, Southeast Asia. So because of the internet, we have time-space compression, which means that our world is more interconnected than ever before, which is leading to pop culture to spread faster than ever. Before we had to deal with distance decay, we no longer need distance decay or no longer have distance decay when it comes to learning about new cultures because we have it at our fingertips. So if you think about a typical band, all right, if you take any band or any TV show or anything on tic-tac-toe that you mess around with, it often spreads first hierarchically amongst linked groups of people, and then it'll spread contagiously to us, everyday people, all right? So pop culture usually always starts hierarchically and then spreads contagiously, all right? And this is just an example of how a certain band called Fish spread all across America and then eventually spreads to Europe, focused on college cities with large college towns, because that's the people that typically listen to that music, and then eventually it spread across the Americas and Europe. Again, hierarchical diffusion is the starting point of all pop culture. If you think of some of the one-hit wonders like Gangnam Style, his videos, his song started first amongst a linked group of people before it became a one-hit wonder all over the world. So where does pop culture start? Typically, pop culture starts in the city heart. So major cities of the world, whether you're talking about music or TV shows or movies, clothing, all of that usually stems from the biggest cities of the world, and then it spreads to the rest. So the biggest areas where pop culture begins is the United States, Europe, Japan, and you could say now China. China is another big one where pop culture is originating with a lot of the apps that they create, like Tic-Tac-Toe or TikTok is an app that started in China. So what does government try to do? Really, we can, as a government, try to resist some of this pop culture trends. So like if you haven't heard, the government tried to stop TikTok from spreading because China owned it and their servers were able to connect sometimes illicit or private information from people to then use against them. And that is why the government trying to disclose or try to limit the amount of TikTok that is being done in our country. We also see that with pop culture, it ultimately dominates other cultures of the world. It creates the idea of fundamentalism or westernization, where America and Europe almost get to set how the cultures should be of the world. And that causes a lot of hesitation and animosity towards people, especially in the Middle East, because it's showing you sometimes values or showing values and showing songs and lyrics that ultimately are not healthy always. We're talking about songs that are talking about sex and drugs and alcohol. Clearly, the Middle East would not approve of that. And that's what's being listened to or being aired with their audience, with their people hearing it. You also talk about American clothing that's very scandalous, that's not very covered, meaning a lot of people are not using clothing to cover their skin. Well, in many parts of the countries, that would be seen as taboo or flawed. So pop culture has a lot of flaws in it, and a lot of times minorities are trying to find a hard time preserving their own culture. So they're trying to prevent assimilation. They're trying to create their own neo-local area in order for pop culture to try to avoid taking over their society, like what's being done in the Middle East and parts of Africa. What happens here is a term called globalization of culture. And when globalization of culture happens, it basically destroys folk culture unless you find a rural area to hide. If you think about surfing, you can go to whatever that place is up in the cities, a great lodge. You can surf inside in the winter in Minnesota. That's not authentic. And what it does is it's caused a globalization of culture, meaning we can create what's known as a global local continuum, where you can localize, take anything that's local and globalize it to fit your area. So we literally now can surf anywhere in the world and not have to be on beaches because of the technology that we found. And then it's spread hierarchically and now contagiously. And now it's in pop culture that a person can surf in many different locations other than just being on the coastline. So it creates a surfing culture that you could possibly accept. So that's just an idea of how people have found ways to globalize and make money off of pop culture. And one last vocab word that really isn't in your textbook, but you might come across it, is re-territorialization. This is when your territory or a region or a country takes an aspect of pop culture and makes it fit their own. So some of you maybe have heard of UFC or WWE. What happened is UFC started after WWE as a way to tap a new audience and create more money. And it just combines basically high school wrestling and sumo wrestling along with professional fighting into a new kind of pop culture sports arena. All right, and that's what UFC did, and now UFC is more popular than WWE. Another example of reterritorialization is when you have rap singers, and like all these famous rap singers basically use each other's lyrics or each other's beats and just kind of make their own and change the words, but yet they're still using similar culture. That's reterritorialization. At this point, I'm just going to show you guys a quick video here that talks about how pop culture changes the stimulus in order for it to still be able to spread.
Hello, everyone. Because this is my first time at TED, I've decided to bring along an old friend to help break the ice a bit. Yes, that's right. This is Barbie. She's 50 years old, and she's looking as young as ever. But I'd also like to introduce you to what may be an unfamiliar face. This is Fulla. Fulla is the Arab world's answer to Barbie. Now, according to proponents of the clash of civilizations, Barbie and Fulla occupy these completely separate spheres. They have different interests, they have divergent values, and should they ever come in contact, well, I gotta tell you, it's just not gonna be pretty. My experience, however, in the Islamic world is very different. Where I work in the Arab region, people are busy taking up Western innovations and changing them into things which are neither conventionally Western nor are they traditionally Islamic. I want to show you two examples. The first is For Shabab. It means for youth, and it's a new Arab TV channel.
Video clips from across the globe. The USA.
You can see that even though it changes, this is still pop culture reached the Middle East. And they have actually appropriated, taken a piece of American pop culture, and the Middle East region is making it their own. And that's what we see with pop culture all around the world. This happens also in architecture. Besides in music and besides in clothing, we can see this, all right? So just think about here, Black Friday's coming up, or Cyber Monday, whatever you call it. Think about when you buy something or doing the frenzy of purchasing things, notice all the things you're buying and how much of it is recreated or is just simply pop culture that our society buys. And also think about where this particular purchase started. Okay. At this point, I want to thank you for tuning in, and we'll stop there. But again, really think about where your pop culture in your life originated.